Before watching, please press like to support me in producing more stories. This helps in spreading the video and reaching more people. Thank you for your support and enjoy watching. They say the best soldiers never really retire. They just find quieter wars. That's what I thought when I left the Green Berets in '97. You see, the army doesn't prepare you for real life. It just teaches you how to survive whatever hellhole you're dropped into. Turns out real life can be worse than any mission briefing. So I found myself back in the thick of it, this time not in some war-torn desert or jungle, but in a place I should have known better than to tread, Hell's Canyon, Idaho. It was late in the fall of 2003. I was working with a private security firm handling sensitive operations that required discretion. That's the formal way to say we cleaned up messes no one else wanted to touch. They sent me up there with 2 others. Sergeant Kelly, an ex-Marine who thought he was funnier than he was, and Jameson, a tech guy whose stomach couldn't handle a stiff wind. We were looking for a small-time weapons dealer who decided to stop paying his dues. Figured he ran into the woods to disappear, thinking no one would care enough to follow. We landed in Boise, drove up the narrow roads that wind through the Bitterroot Range until the signs turned into mile markers and the road became more dirt than asphalt. The air was thin, the kind that makes you think too hard about every breath. Kelly, true to form, tried to lighten the mood, cracking jokes about how this was turning into the worst camping trip he'd ever been on. I told him to shut up, because his voice echoed too much in the canyons. No one else was laughing. By the time we made it to the last known coordinates, dusk was setting in. Perfect timing, right? We had some basic intel. A cabin in the woods, rented under an alias, cash payments off-grid but not impossible to trace. It was just like any other hunt. Find the target, bring them back alive if possible, dead if not. That's what I thought. Jameson stayed in the truck, messing with his gear, too jittery to even enjoy the view. Kelly and I hiked up the ridge toward the cabin. The trees were dense, a mix of pine and cedar, and the air was damp with the kind of cold that bites through your clothes no matter how layered you are. I remember thinking it smelled odd out there, something musty, like rotting wood and stagnant water, but I brushed it off. When we reached the cabin, it looked abandoned. Boarded-up windows, a door hanging on its hinges, and an eerie silence that even Kelly couldn't crack a joke about. He glanced at me, eyebrows raised. No lights, no sign of life, just the feeling you get when someone's been watching too long. The inside was worse than the outside. Dust thick in the air, overturned chairs, a smashed-up stove, and what looked like dried blood on the floor. I stepped over a broken chair leg and pushed open the back door. The forest stretched out before us, dark and endless, but that wasn't what caught my attention. Behind the cabin, something had torn through the brush, leaving a jagged path like a bulldozer had run wild. Only it wasn't wide enough for a machine, and there were prints, large ones, too large for a bear or a wolf, but shaped like some twisted version of both. Kelly knelt beside the tracks, muttering something about bears, and I could see he didn't believe his own words. I didn't say anything. I'd seen enough weird things in my time not to jump to conclusions. We followed the path, slow and steady, but the prints kept getting more erratic, like whatever made them was zigzagging through the woods. I could hear something in the distance, not quite a growl, I know, no growling, but a sound that felt like it was ripping through the air. Maybe it was the wind, maybe not. Kelly was ahead of me, scanning the area when we came across the first body. It wasn't our guy. It was some poor hiker, torso ripped open, guts spilling like someone had tried to dress a deer but gave up halfway through. His face, though, his face was untouched. That's what got me. No bear would do that. Rip apart a body like it was meat and leave the face clean as a whistle. We exchanged a look. Kelly had this way of making light of situations, but even he couldn't joke about this one. We both knew this was beyond what we came here for. I radioed back to Jameson, telling him to stay put and keep the engine running. No sense dragging him out into this. We pressed forward, following the trail of destruction. Another mile in, we found another body. This time it was in worse shape. Whoever it was, hiker, poacher, I don't know. They had been torn apart so thoroughly that pieces of them were stuck to the trees. There was a hand still gripping a branch like it was trying to escape. We kept moving, and by now I could hear it, not far off, a shuffling, lumbering noise that sent waves of unease through my bones. Kelly's face had gone pale, his mouth dry. He muttered something about it not being in the brochure, but I could tell he was trying to keep from throwing up. I wasn't far behind him in that. When we finally saw it, I think it took a second for my brain to register. It stood at least 7 feet tall, covered in thick, matted fur that looked almost mossy in the dim light. Its face was the worst part, elongated like a deer's but with sharp, jagged teeth that didn't fit in its mouth, and its arms, too long, too thin, ending in claws that could gut a man in a heartbeat. It was hunched, sniffing at something on the ground. A fresh kill. I don't know whose body it was, but I knew one thing. It wasn't going to stop there. Kelly raised his rifle, but I put my hand on the barrel. Shooting at it felt like the worst thing we could do. I didn't say it aloud, but I had the sense we were dealing with something that didn't follow the rules we were used to. It sniffed the air, and in a heartbeat its head jerked up, those black, lifeless pits of its skull locking onto us. It let out a screech, not a roar, just this high-pitched, agonizing wail like it was in pain, and it charged. No thought, no hesitation, it just lunged. I pushed Kelly to the side and we barely dodged it. Its claws scraped the bark off a nearby tree like it was slicing through butter. We scrambled backward, firing off rounds. Kelly hit it in the side, but it didn't stop. It barely flinched. I emptied half my clip into its torso before it finally staggered back, letting out another of those terrible screams. And then it bolted, faster than I'd thought something that size could move, disappearing into the trees. We sat there, breathing heavily, trying to process what the hell just happened. Kelly was muttering under his breath, something about quitting this job and moving to Hawaii, but I was focused on the blood trail. We hit it, which meant it could bleed, which meant it could die. We didn't chase it right away, though. We circled back to Jameson. The sun was gone, leaving nothing but a thin sliver of moonlight to guide us back. When we reached the truck, Jameson looked like he'd seen a ghost. He didn't say anything, just handed me a note he'd found on the cabin's door while we were gone. It was scrawled in messy handwriting, but clear enough to read. "Leave or be hunted. We should have left right then, but you don't walk away from a fight like that, not when you've already lost too much. We made camp for the night, which was a mistake. You never settle in hostile territory. But we did anyway. Figured with 3 of us we'd be fine." Around 3 a.m., I heard something. No, felt it more than anything else. A heavy presence, like the air itself was suffocating us. I grabbed my rifle and nudged Kelly awake. Jameson was already up, staring into the trees. Before I could ask what he saw, there was a rush of movement, a blur, and Jameson was gone. 1 second he was standing next to us, the next he was yanked into the darkness like he weighed nothing. Kelly panicked, started firing blindly into the trees. I tried to grab him, to pull him back to the truck, but it was too late. Whatever it was, it came back for him, slashing across his throat before I could blink. He collapsed, clutching at the wound, gurgling as blood poured from his neck. I fired, hitting the creature square in the back, but it didn't even turn around. It just kept dragging Kelly's body into the woods. I was alone now. I did the only thing I could. I ran. I ran like hell. Got back to the truck, barely managing to turn the ignition. The headlights flashed on just in time to see it standing at the edge of the clearing, Kelly's body limp in its grip. It dropped him when it saw me and began to approach the truck, slowly this time, as if daring me to try something. I floored it, tearing down the narrow dirt road, heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. The tires spun in the loose gravel, skidding as I tried to control the truck on the winding path. My hands were shaking, my vision tunneling on the rearview mirror as I saw the creature moving behind me, fast. Faster than I thought anything that size could run. It darted between the trees, barely visible except for the brief flashes of its grotesque form illuminated by the truck's taillights. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. My mind was racing, but all I could focus on was survival. I swerved around a tight corner, the truck nearly flipping as I struggled to keep it on the road. I glanced in the mirror again. Nothing. The creature was gone. I didn't let up. I didn't trust the quiet. Something about the sudden absence of sound felt worse than hearing it chase me. My mind was trying to process what had just happened. Kelly was dead. Jameson was gone, likely in pieces somewhere in that hellhole of a forest. And I was the idiot who had thought this would be just another mission. An hour later, I finally reached a ranger station. Just a single cabin with a radio and a supply of emergency gear. I stumbled out of the truck, still gripping the rifle like a lifeline, and burst through the door. The ranger on duty stared at me like I was a ghost. I didn't have time for pleasantries. I told him to lock the door, radio for backup, anything. Just do it now. He hesitated, clearly not understanding the urgency, but when he saw the blood on my clothes, he moved quickly. As he fumbled with the radio, I sat down, feeling the weight of exhaustion crash over me. My legs were shaking, adrenaline finally draining from my system. But just as the ranger was about to make the call, I heard something, a scratching at the door. I jumped up, rifle raised. The ranger froze, his hand on the radio, eyes wide as he looked toward the door. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, like whatever was outside was testing the threshold. Then, a low, rattling breath. I don't know what compelled me to speak, but I muttered something about how maybe Kelly wasn't so wrong about retiring to Hawaii. Dark humor in a dark moment, I guess. The ranger gave me a look like I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had. But in that instant, I knew without a doubt, that door wasn't going to hold. We backed up slowly, and I motioned for the ranger to follow me into the back room. There were no windows back there, just a single solid door. We barricaded ourselves in, with me watching the entrance, rifle trained and steady, waiting. For hours, nothing happened. No more scratching, no breathing, no signs of movement. Just silence. The ranger looked at me, clearly terrified, but all I could think about was Kelly's face, his wide-eyed stare as the blood poured from his throat, and Jameson disappearing into the night. By morning, I opened the door cautiously, rifle at the ready. The front door to the station was splintered, but it hadn't been broken through, just scratched. The thing had left, at least for now. I radioed for a team to come out, explaining the situation in as professional a manner as I could without sounding completely insane. Backup arrived a few hours later. Armed rangers, a few law enforcement agents, and a handful of government guys I didn't recognize. They secured the area, found Kelly's body and the remnants of Jameson. They brought them back, packed them up in body bags without a word. The official report called it a rogue animal attack. Some kind of bear hybrid. Bullshit. They knew, and they weren't telling me or anyone else the truth. As for the creature, they didn't find it. Of course they didn't, but they found enough evidence, blood and claw marks to know something terrible happened out there. Before I left the ranger station, one of the government guys pulled me aside. His face was pale, eyes sunken in, like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. He handed me a slip of paper, just 2 words scrawled on it. Stay quiet. And that was it. The end of it. We were told to leave, to forget what we'd seen. No further questions, no investigation. Just move on. I'd love to say I went back to my old life, but that's not true. After what happened, I left the security business. Retired for good this time. People joke about monsters and cryptids like it's all fun and games. But let me tell you, when you've seen what I've seen, you know there's nothing funny about it. Kelly always joked about moving to Hawaii. He never made it. And maybe I should, just for him. Someplace with clear skies, no woods, and definitely no goddamn monsters. I guess that's my retirement plan. And as for that thing, maybe it's still out there, lurking in the woods, hunting whatever poor soul is unlucky enough to cross its path. But that's not my problem anymore. Someone else can deal with it. The ranger station, they shut it down not long after we left. People said it was due to budget cuts. Sure, let's go with that. I hadn't thought about Afghanistan in years, at least not in the way you might expect from someone who spent 5 deployments there. Funny thing about memory is it fades like those boot prints in the sandstorms. This isn't about that, though. This one's about 2005 Honduras. A jungle so thick and wet it felt like you were breathing through a sponge. We'd been deployed there under the guise of a humanitarian mission, fixing up a water filtration plant, but my Green Beret team knew there was more to it. I had been in the army long enough to smell the real reasons behind orders. I'm Rob Darnell. 5 years in the Green Berets before that. A job installing drywall for a guy who spent more time at the pub than on site. Didn't want that life. I wasn't exactly what you'd call book smart, but I had my head screwed on straight enough to know I needed out. So, I signed up. They didn't even bat an eye when I showed up, broad-shouldered and already used to lugging heavy crap around. Anyway, back to the mission. It was supposed to be a standard week-long affair. Our team had been dropped off in the middle of nowhere, making contact with a local village about an hour's hike from where we set up camp. The higher-ups had us on a tight leash, told us to keep low, stay unnoticed. I figured it was to avoid spooking the drug cartels that ran this place. I didn't care much for the politics. You give me a jungle and something to shoot, I do the job. We were 3 days into this humid hellhole when our point man, Owen, came across something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't your run-of-the-mill drug mule camp, not the scattered gear or half-assed tents you'd expect. This was different. There were bones. Not animal bones. No, those were too familiar. These were bigger. Human. Picked clean, and piled in ways that didn't seem natural. Something had arranged them, like a kid stacking blocks. Dark humor got the best of us then, and Owen cracked a joke about a dinner party gone wrong, but I could tell none of us were laughing inside. Still, orders were orders. We were Green Berets, trained not to flinch, but something about those bones gnawed at the edges of my brain. They were polished, like someone had spent a lot of time making sure there wasn't a speck of flesh left. Owen kept leading us deeper into the thicket, pushing past the vines and the dense canopy, his machete slashing through the overgrowth as we ventured into territory none of us wanted to explore. The heat was oppressive, a tangible weight that bore down on you, but there was something else. The jungle had grown quiet, too quiet for my liking. No birds, no insects, just the squelching of our boots in the muck. It was Owen who saw it first, an opening in the trees, a clearing. He motioned for us to hold. That's when we saw the hut, more of a shack really, standing in the middle of the clearing like some relic forgotten by time. And surrounding it, those bones again, but this time they weren't just scattered. They were arranged in circles, spirals, patterns I couldn't quite make sense of, but I knew they weren't made by any animal. The stench hit us next. It was faint, carried by a breeze that didn't feel natural in the stillness of the jungle. Like something rotting but worse, deeper, as if it had been festering in the heat for years. Owen stepped forward, his rifle raised, and the rest of us fanned out, covering him from different angles. We were used to kicking down doors in dusty villages, but this was different. Something primal told me not to go near that place, and I think the others felt it too. As we approached, we saw movement, a figure darting inside the shack. Too quick for us to get a clear look, but enough to know we weren't alone. I shot Owen a glance, and he nodded. We closed in, keeping tight, moving like the team we were. The door was hanging off its hinges, barely a door at all. Inside, it was dark, even with the midday sun blazing above. Owen went in first, and the rest of us followed. The first thing that hit me wasn't the sight, though that was bad enough. It was the smell. You ever come across something that smells so bad it feels like it punches you in the gut? Yeah, that. There were bodies, half of them at least. Limbs torn off, torsos split open. Some of them were old, leathery, the skin pulled tight over bones like something out of a museum. Others were fresh, the blood not even dried. And that's when it hit me. Whoever did this, whatever did this, was still around. The walls of the shack were covered in carvings, strange symbols and markings that looked ancient, but they didn't make any sense. I'm no archaeologist, but I've seen my fair share of weird shit in old ruins. This was different. This was deliberate. Someone, or something, had been living here for a long time, and judging by the bones outside, they weren't picky about what they ate. We heard the sound next. Scratching, like claws on wood, coming from beneath the floorboards. I looked at Owen, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. He wasn't cracking jokes anymore. None of us were. "Get it open," I said, and two of the guys started prying up the boards. What we found underneath wasn't a cellar like I expected. It was a tunnel leading down into the earth, into the blackness. There were marks along the walls, claw marks, deep and ragged like something had been digging its way in, or out. "Whatever's down there," Owen said, his voice low. "It's not human." We didn't have time to debate. That scratching sound grew louder, and I knew we had a choice. Leave now or go down into the tunnel. I knew which one was the smart option. I also knew that's not what we were going to do. We went down one by one into the darkness. Our flashlights barely pierced the gloom, and the air was thick, humid, like the jungle above had followed us underground. The walls were damp, covered in mold, and the tunnel sloped downwards at a steep angle. We moved in silence, every step echoing off the stone. Then we heard it. Breathing. Not ours. Something else. Something big. It was coming from up ahead, and we knew we were getting closer. Owen was at the front, his rifle up, ready for anything. But when we turned the corner, what we saw wasn't something you could prepare for. It was massive, hunched over, its body covered in matted fur that glistened with sweat, and something else I didn't want to think about. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever seen, though I've seen some pretty messed up creatures in the jungle. Its limbs were long, too long, the hands ending in claws that scraped against the stone floor as it moved. But its face, that was the worst part. It had a mouth that stretched too wide, with rows of sharp, jagged teeth, but no eyes that I could see, just dark pits where they should have been. We opened fire immediately, our rifles spitting rounds into the thing's body. It didn't flinch. Didn't even seem to notice the bullets tearing through its flesh. It just kept coming, slow and deliberate, as if it knew we couldn't stop it. Owen was the first to go down. The thing lunged at him with a speed I didn't think was possible for something that size. One swipe of its claws and he was down, his chest ripped open like paper. Blood sprayed across the tunnel, and I knew there was nothing we could do for him. We started to retreat, firing as we went. But it kept coming, relentless, unstoppable. One by one it picked us off, tearing through flesh and bone with those claws. There was no stopping it. I was the last one standing, my back against the tunnel wall, my rifle empty. I pulled out my knife, not because I thought it would help, but because I wasn't going to die without a fight. The thing lunged at me and I braced for the end. But then it stopped. It just stood there, inches from my face, its breath hot and rancid. I could see the blood dripping from its claws, my teammates' blood. I was ready to die. But it didn't kill me. Instead, it turned and disappeared back into the tunnel, leaving me there, alone, surrounded by the bodies of my team. I don't know why it spared me. Maybe it wanted me to live with what I'd seen, to spread the story. Or maybe it just wasn't hungry anymore. But whatever the reason, I made my way out of that tunnel, dragging myself back to the surface, the weight of my team's deaths heavy on my shoulders. We were supposed to be the best, the ones who survived anything, but we didn't. I never went back to Honduras. Never talked about it either. What would I say? No one would believe me anyway. They'd think I cracked under the pressure, made up some story to explain why I was the only one who came back. But I know what happened down there. There are moments you just can't train for, no matter how much experience you've got under your belt. I should know. Name's Rick Fletcher, 1993, middle of an op in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, not far from the Canadian border. I was with a small recon unit, 5 of us in total, running a covert intel mission on suspected cartel smuggling routes. Seemed routine, even dull at first, until it wasn't. Before we get into the gritty details, a bit about me. I'd been a Green Beret for 8 years, surviving on caffeine, bad jokes, and a good amount of luck. Call it dark humor, or just coping, but it's hard not to make jokes when you've seen enough of your friends get chewed up and spit out by life, sometimes literally. My wife once joked that I probably couldn't handle civilian life because I wouldn't know what to do with all that peace and quiet. She was right, but she also didn't get why peace felt like a bomb waiting to go off. We were a mile into the forest when we noticed something wasn't right. When I say noticed, I mean everything felt too damn quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. It wasn't like nature had gone mute. It felt like everything had run the hell away. The guys noticed it too, though nobody said a word. We didn't need to. There was Craig, tough as nails from Texas, the kind of guy who could joke about stepping on a mine and make you believe it was a good laugh. Benson, who was just as likely to patch you up as he was to scold you for getting shot in the first place. Ford, the one with the family, a picture of his kid always tucked inside his helmet. Then there was Dobbs. He never shut up about conspiracy theories. Half the time you weren't sure if he was joking or serious. The briefing said the area was used for smuggling runs, mostly drugs, sometimes weapons. It also said nothing about strange happenings. Nobody had warned us about the absence of life, the stillness that clung to the trees like a predator stalking its prey. In retrospect, maybe it was all wrong from the start. We pushed deeper into the woods, radio checks every 15 minutes. The terrain wasn't the issue, it was the creeping dread, that irrational gut feeling you get, like something's watching. I remember thinking how quiet Dobbs had gotten, and for him, that was a red flag. The man could talk anyone's ear off, but that day, silent as the grave. We set up camp just after dusk. By then we were all on edge, though none of us would admit it. Standard practice. 2 guys on watch while the rest caught what sleep they could. I had first shift with Craig, who'd taken to sharpening his knife like it was a nervous habit. He'd always been fidgety, but tonight, it seemed worse. "Ever feel like we're the ones being watched?" he asked, voice low, barely above a whisper. I remember chuckling, telling him he'd been hanging out with Dobbs too much. It was a lame attempt at lightening the mood, but it fell flat. A few hours into the watch, something moved. Not in the trees, not far off, but close. Real close. Craig nudged me, pointing toward a dense thicket about 50 feet from our camp. I strained my ears, but the only thing I could hear was my own breathing. Then we saw it. A figure, humanoid, but all wrong. Too tall, too thin. It moved like it didn't know how to move, as if the joints weren't quite aligned. I remember thinking it was like watching a marionette, only there were no strings. Craig cursed under his breath, his hand already on his weapon. We didn't fire. Could have been one of the locals, someone strung out on drugs or something. But that thing wasn't behaving like a person, not like anything I'd ever seen. When it turned its head, well, I don't even know if you could call it a head. We got a clearer view. Its skin was stretched tight, pale, like something that had been cooked too long and shriveled up. But there were no features, none that we could make out. No face, no eyes. It was like the skin itself was the only thing holding it together. Craig stood up, whispering that he'd go check it out, but I grabbed his arm. We didn't know what the hell we were dealing with, and I wasn't about to let him go off and become whatever that thing wanted for dinner. Ford and Benson woke up soon after, and when they did, we explained what we saw. Dobbs, of course, didn't need convincing. "I told you, man," he said, like this was proof of some crazy theory he'd spouted back at base. "You don't just get silence like this for no reason. There's something out there. Something that ain't natural." And that's when it made its first move. One moment it was 50 feet away, the next it was 20. The way it closed the distance, fast, soundless. It was like it teleported, but I knew it didn't. It was just that damn quick. Craig opened fire first, a burst of gunfire that should have dropped any human or animal. The thing didn't even flinch. It just kept coming, smooth, almost graceful, like it didn't care about bullets. That's when the panic set in. Ford was shouting orders, Benson was firing, and I remember Dobbs standing there, frozen like a statue, just watching. In the chaos, Ford took a hit. Not from gunfire, but from that thing. It didn't swipe or grab like a person, it just reached, its fingers longer than they had any right to be, and Ford crumpled like his bones had turned to jelly. I saw the terror in his eyes, but he couldn't scream. It was like his body had been shut off before he could even process what was happening. It got Craig next, quicker than I could react. He was down, and I swear I saw it. The thing bending over him, like it was studying him. Before I could process the thought, it shot up again, standing tall and unnatural. The rest of us scattered. We ran. Benson and I went one way, Dobbs took another. The forest, dark and dense, swallowed us up, but I could hear it moving, that strange, too-fast pace, like it was playing with us. We tried calling for help on the radios, but all we got was static. Hours blurred into minutes. We stumbled through the woods, lost, disoriented. Benson kept muttering something about his wife, his kids, and for the first time I saw him crack. We weren't trained for this. Hell, nobody was. We reached a clearing, and that's when Benson collapsed. He wasn't injured, not physically, but mentally he was gone. He looked up at me, panic in his eyes, and then he just stopped breathing. I don't know if it was shock or if that thing had done something to him, but Benson was dead before I could help him. I didn't stop to think. I couldn't. I ran. There was no way back to camp. No way to save Craig or Ford. Dobbs was still out there somewhere, but I knew I wouldn't see him again. By the time I made it to the edge of the forest, the sky was starting to lighten, but it didn't feel like morning. It felt like the end of something, maybe just my sanity. My comms crackled to life, but it was garbled, unintelligible. I don't know if they ever got my message. Back at base, nobody believed me. They found Ford's body crushed like he'd fallen from a great height. They found Benson too, but no obvious cause of death. Craig and Dobbs were never found. The official report said we encountered hostile wildlife. That's the military's way of saying, we don't know what the hell it was. You can't prepare for something like that. No amount of training, no years in the field can make sense of what happened. But I'll tell you this much. I wasn't the first to see it, and I won't be the last. You know, I never expected this to happen on a routine operation, especially not in the middle of nowhere. It was the summer of 2011, and I was in southern Utah, near the canyons. I'm Greg Milton, by the way. Been in the Special Forces for most of my life, but even that didn't prepare me for what went down during that mission. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This was supposed to be an extraction. Get in, secure the asset, and get out. Simple enough. We'd done it 1,000 times, but this time the location was a little off. Our intel placed us about 50 miles into the desert, deep in the maze of red rock and narrow passes. We were given some vague coordinates of where we'd find the asset, a scientist working on something classified, but they failed to mention one thing. The locals had gone dark. Communications had stopped a week prior. No reason given. Just gone. We were a team of 5, and I'd worked with all of them before. You can tell a lot about a guy when you're getting shot at together. Tanner, our medic, was the type of guy who could fix a wound while cracking a joke, even if he was the one bleeding. Then there was Diaz, our explosives expert, always too cocky for his own good, but he knew his way around a detonator. Parker was our comms guy, quieter than most, but always reliable. And then there was Matthews. He was new, sharp, but still green, which made me uneasy. Green guys always have something to prove. The chopper dropped us off just before dusk. Red cliffs towered over us, and the air had that dry, suffocating heat that sticks to your lungs. We hiked toward the coordinates. Radio silence. No one responded, not even a static hum. I remember joking that maybe the asset just forgot to charge their radio, and Tanner laughed, saying, "Or maybe they're hiding from your ugly mug, Greg." As we moved deeper into the canyon, something didn't feel right. The place was too still, like the air was holding its breath. The only sound was our boots on the sand, crunching through the dry earth. Even the birds seemed to have left. It wasn't until we found the first set of tracks that things started to go sideways. The tracks weren't human. At first glance, they looked like large animal prints, maybe from a big cat, but as we followed them, they grew erratic. The spacing was off, like whatever it was had been limping or dragging something heavy behind it. But what really made me stop was the claw marks, long, deep, and gouged into the rock like it had been trying to climb. I didn't say anything at first. I wasn't about to spook the team, not over some strange tracks. About an hour in, the sun had nearly set, casting long shadows across the canyon. That's when we found the outpost, or what was left of it. Diaz was the first to spot it. "What the hell?" he muttered. The outpost looked like it had been ripped apart. And I mean that literally, ripped. The steel doors were torn off their hinges, the windows shattered and debris scattered across the ground like someone had gone through with a wrecking ball. Except it wasn't someone. It wasn't possible. We spread out, rifles up, scanning the area. I could see Parker at the comms tent, trying to see if any equipment was salvageable. Tanner was checking the perimeter with Matthews, and Diaz was examining some of the debris, muttering curses under his breath. The silence was unsettling. No movement, no wind, just that dead, heavy quiet. Then Parker called out, "Greg, you better come see this." I walked over and he pointed to a blood-stained piece of cloth. It was wrapped around what looked like a half-eaten leg. Human, definitely human. The bones were gnawed clean, but the flesh, it was shredded. Whatever did this, it wasn't playing around. "How old?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Couple days, maybe," Parker replied, his voice tight. "And this isn't the only one." We searched the rest of the outpost, finding more remains. Some were hidden in shallow graves, others scattered across the dirt like someone or something had been dragging the bodies around. Matthews was the one to find the body of the scientist we were supposed to extract, at least what was left of him. His ID badge was still pinned to his shredded lab coat, though his face was missing. His torso looked like it had been through a meat grinder. "Jesus Christ," Tanner said, wiping sweat from his brow. "What could have done this?" I didn't have an answer, but I could feel something watching us. It was an instinct. That sense you get when you know you're not alone. We were being hunted. "Everyone stay sharp," I ordered. "We move in pairs. No one goes anywhere alone." As night fell, the temperature dropped fast. The canyon, once so vividly red in the daylight, now felt like a tomb. We set up camp near the ruins of the outpost, figuring we'd start fresh at dawn. But the night had other plans. Around midnight we heard it. A scraping sound, faint at first, but growing louder. It echoed off the canyon walls, bouncing around like it was coming from all directions. Diaz was on watch and he radioed in. "I see something, North Ridge, can't make it out, but it's big." "Don't engage," I told him, but Diaz wasn't known for patience. There was a sharp crack, gunfire, then silence. I sprinted toward Diaz's position, Tanner right behind me. We found him standing, rifle raised, staring into the darkness. His hands were shaking. "It's gone," he said, barely audible. "It was right there, then it just vanished." "Vanished?" I asked, looking out at the empty ridge. "What the hell are you talking about?" Diaz didn't answer. His face was pale, and he kept looking over his shoulder, like he was waiting for something to come back. We regrouped, deciding to pack up and move. Staying put was no longer an option. But as we started gathering our gear, we heard the sound again, the scraping, this time closer. Much closer. "Eyes up!" I barked, scanning the darkness with my rifle. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Something large, fast, and silent darting between the rocks. It was too quick to get a good look, but I caught a glimpse of its silhouette, long limbs, hunched posture, and what looked like claws glinting in the faint moonlight. "Contact!" Parker shouted, opening fire. We all followed suit, lighting up the canyon with muzzle flashes. But whatever it was playing with us. It stayed just out of sight, moving too fast for us to hit. Then it stopped. Complete silence fell over the canyon again, but I knew better. It was still there, watching us, waiting. "Move out," I ordered, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're leaving. Now." We made it about 50 yards before Matthew screamed. I turned just in time to see him being dragged into the darkness, something wrapped around his leg, pulling him with inhuman strength. His rifle clattered to the ground as he disappeared into the shadows. "Matthews!" Tanner shouted, running after him, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't. It's too late," I said, though the words felt hollow. We didn't stop moving after that. Whatever was out there had tasted blood, and I wasn't about to let it pick us off one by one. We moved fast, sticking close together, but every few minutes we'd hear that scraping sound, closer each time. By the time we reached the extraction point, the sun was starting to rise. We were down a man, and we still hadn't seen what had killed him. Not clearly, anyway. The chopper arrived, and as we climbed in, I saw it, just for a split second, standing on the ridge, watching us. It was tall, thin, with arms too long for its body. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its mouth... I could see the teeth, sharp, jagged, and stained with blood. I didn't say a word as the chopper lifted off. What was there to say? When we got back to base, we filed our report. Missing asset, hostile forces encountered, 1 KIA. Standard procedure. No one asked questions, and no one ever went back to that canyon. It's funny, though. They always brief you on the mission, give you all the details about the objective, the terrain, the enemy. But no one ever tells you what to do when you come face to face with something that shouldn't exist. Looking back now, I probably should have asked for a pay raise after that. I've seen enough over my 17 years in Special Forces to know that most things don't surprise me anymore. Or so I thought. My name is Kyle Hawthorne, Green Beret, and I was on a mission that took me to a place that should have been routine. It wasn't. The year was 2004, and I was stationed in the northernmost stretches of Alaska, a cold, bleak wasteland where even the trees looked like they were giving up. I was here for a reconnaissance mission that should have been clean and quiet, like most of the ones we do. But this one, not so much. There were reports of animal attacks in the area, but nothing official. You know how these things go. Locals talk, rumors spread, but nothing concrete ever lands on the desk. I'd seen what a Kodiak bear can do to a man, so I was skeptical that there was anything we hadn't seen before. Yet, the brass wanted us to check it out. Simple recon, they said. Take pictures, gather intel, and come back to base. Easy. They dropped me and my team about 50 clicks outside of Barrow. There wasn't much out there, just the vast white of frozen nothingness. Our contact, a grizzled man named Tomek, was waiting for us by an old beat-up truck. I could tell by the look in his eyes that he didn't want to be here. This place, Tomek began, his voice gravelly, like he'd swallowed too many cigarettes over the years. It's not right. You shouldn't be here. That's the kind of thing you hear right before you realize you should have stayed in bed that morning. But orders are orders. We set out on foot from there, trekking across the tundra, watching the sky turn from gray to black as the temperature plummeted. Hours later, we reached the tree line where the attacks were said to have happened. And that's when we found it. The first body. Mauled, shredded in ways that didn't make sense. I've seen wolves rip through a person before, and this wasn't that. Whatever had done this was either stronger or angrier. Lance Corporal Rodriguez, the kid who'd only been with us for a year, tried to make light of it, saying, "Looks like this guy didn't get the memo about staying indoors." Nobody laughed. We found another body about half a mile deeper into the forest. This one was fresher, a local hunter, judging by the gear. His rifle was snapped clean in half, like a twig. I glanced at my team. None of us said it, but we were all thinking the same thing. What could do that? By dusk, we'd set up camp. The temperature dropped even further, but it wasn't the cold that bothered me. There was a silence here that I didn't like. Not even the usual rustling you'd expect in a place like this. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. "Let's call it a night," I said, my voice steady, though my instincts were screaming otherwise. I took first watch, staring out into the endless dark. That's when I heard it, a faint rustling at first, probably just the wind. But then something else, like branches snapping under the weight of something massive. I stood up, gripping my rifle, scanning the tree line. There was nothing. I could hear the others breathing in the tent behind me. They didn't notice. I stepped out further just to get a better look. That's when I saw it, a shape, something crouched low to the ground, moving slowly, deliberately through the snow. It was too big to be a man, but it moved like one. I didn't dare call out to the team just yet. I needed to see it first, confirm it wasn't just my eyes playing tricks on me in the cold. I crept closer, keeping the shape in my sight. My breath hung in the air like mist. and the cold bit at my skin, but my focus stayed locked. It moved again, faster this time, darting between the trees with a speed that didn't match its size. I caught a glimpse of something just for a second, fur, but not like an animal's. It was patchy, mangy, like it had been torn in places. And then it was gone. I backed up slowly, feeling the hairs on my neck rise. When I returned to camp, I woke the team. Rodriguez was the first to ask, "What's wrong?" "We're not alone," I said, keeping my voice low. "Bear," Harrison, the team medic, asked. I shook my head. No. They didn't ask any more questions after that. We packed up camp at first light and continued our sweep of the area. I kept my guard up, eyes scanning the forest line, half expecting whatever that thing was to leap out at us at any moment. But the day passed uneventfully. No more bodies, no signs of life, just that eerie, oppressive silence. It wasn't until nightfall that things went sideways. We were setting up camp again when we heard it. A guttural screech, so loud and so unnatural that it felt like it vibrated through the ground beneath our feet. I'd heard plenty of animals scream before, but this was different. Everyone froze. Then the tree line exploded. Whatever it was hit Rodriguez first, slamming him into a tree like a rag doll. I didn't have time to react before it was on Harrison. The medic screamed as it tore into him, claws raking across his body with brutal precision. I opened fire, but it was too fast, moving through the shadows like it was made of them. I managed to put a few rounds in its direction, but it didn't slow down. It wasn't until the thing turned toward me that I saw it clearly. I don't know what it was. The closest I could compare it to would be a giant, malformed wolverine, but that didn't quite fit. Its limbs were too long, its teeth too jagged, its body twisted in ways that didn't make sense. I saw madness in it, an unrelenting hunger. I fired again, emptying my clip into the thing. It let out another screech, but this time it faltered, just for a second. That was enough. I grabbed Rodriguez, who was barely conscious, and pulled him away from the clearing. We didn't stop running until we reached the ridge a few hundred yards away. Harrison was gone. I didn't need to look back to know that. Rodriguez, bleeding heavily from the side, muttered something incoherent, but I couldn't focus on that. I was trying to wrap my head around what I had just seen. We weren't dealing with an animal. At least, not one that made any sense. The thing didn't follow us. Maybe it was satisfied, maybe it was wounded. I didn't care. We needed to get out of there fast. By the time we made it back to Tomac's truck, I could barely think straight. Rodriguez was slipping in and out of consciousness, mumbling about the thing that had attacked us. I told Tomac to drive, and he didn't ask questions. The silence on the way back to the outpost was suffocating. Rodriguez didn't make it. He stopped breathing before we hit the town. Harrison's screams, though? Those stayed with me. We reported what happened, but you know how it goes. The brass doesn't care about details like that. They'll write it off as some wild animal attack. They'll bury the bodies and forget about it. But I can't forget. A few days later, I got a call from Tomac. He sounded shaken, more than usual. I thought it was just the aftermath of what happened, but he said he'd found something. Bones, scattered, gnawed, too many of them. I didn't ask for more details. I didn't want them. As for me, I'm back at base now, sitting in this room trying to write a report that no one will believe. They'll say it was stress, hallucinations from the cold, maybe even exhaustion. They'll say it's not real, but you don't forget something like that, and I can't help but think it's still out there. In 2015, I found myself deep in the jungles of Papua New Guinea. The air was thick with humidity, and every step felt like trudging through molasses. Name's Victor Hartman, and after 12 years as a Green Beret, I thought I'd seen it all. The Army had a funny way of surprising you, though. They dropped me and my team into the middle of nowhere to locate a missing research group studying indigenous plants. Sounded simple enough, until it wasn't. The village at the edge of the jungle was our last known checkpoint. Huts made of bamboo and thatched roofs dotted the landscape. The locals eyed us warily, their conversations halting whenever we approached. My grasp of talk pieces was shaky, but enough to catch snippets about spirits and darkness. Jackson, one of my guys, chuckled. Looks like we've spooked the locals. Maybe they think we're the spirits. I smirked. Or maybe they just don't like your singing, Jack. We met with the village elder, an old man whose wrinkles had wrinkles. He refused to make eye contact, focusing instead on the carved wooden totem he held tightly. Through a translator, he warned us to turn back, saying the jungle was closed. I joked, well, somebody forgot to hang up the Do Not Disturb sign. The translator didn't laugh. Ignoring the ominous caution, we ventured further. The canopy above was so dense that only specks of sunlight pierced through, casting a perpetual twilight. Birds were silent, and even the insects seemed to avoid this part of the jungle. It was eerie, but I've never been one to let a quiet forest get under my skin. After hours of trekking, we stumbled upon the researchers' campsite, or what was left of it. Tents were shredded, equipment smashed, and the ground was stained a dark, rusty color. This doesn't look like a bear attack, Mendoza muttered. Bears? In Papua New Guinea? I raised an eyebrow. You never know, he shrugged. Maybe it's a really lost one. We split up to search for any clues. I found a journal near one of the collapsed tents. Flipping through, the last entry read, "Something is watching us. We shouldn't have come here." Cliché, I thought. Probably just jungle paranoia. A scream shattered the silence. I bolted toward the sound, branches whipping against my face. Jackson was standing over something, or someone. Dr. Emily Brooks, the lead researcher, lay there, eyes wide open but lifeless. Deep gashes crisscrossed her torso. What could have done this? Jackson whispered. Definitely not a bear, I replied grimly. As we regrouped, a low, rumbling sound echoed around us. Did you hear that? Mendoza's eyes darted through the trees. Probably just your stomach. I tried to lighten the mood. No one laughed. Then we saw it. A massive creature emerged from the shadows, standing on 4 muscular legs. It had the body of a panther, but was easily the size of a rhino. Its fur was midnight black, absorbing the light around it. But what caught my attention were the tusks, long, curved, and razor-sharp like a saber-toothed tiger brought back from extinction. "Fall back!" I shouted. We fired our weapons, the gunshots deafening in the confined space. The bullets seemed to graze off its hide, barely slowing it down. It charged at us with astonishing speed. Jackson wasn't quick enough. The creature swiped at him, and he went down, hard. "Man down!" Mendoza yelled. I grabbed a flare from my pack and ignited it, waving it wildly. The bright light seemed to irritate the beast, and it hesitated. "Fire another volley," I ordered. This time we aimed for its head. A lucky shot hit its eye, and it let out a howl that shook the leaves off the trees. Seizing the moment, we grabbed Jackson, or what was left of him, and retreated. Running blindly, branches and vines tore at our uniforms. The creature was still on our heels, crashing through the underbrush like a freight train. "Any bright ideas?" Mendoza panted. "Working on it." Up ahead, I spotted a narrow crevice in a rock formation. "There!" We squeezed through, the creature slamming against the rocks behind us. Its tusks scraped against the stone, sending sparks flying. "Looks like he's not a fan of tight spaces," I quipped. Mendoza managed a weak smile. "Guess he won't be joining us for hide-and-seek." Inside the cave, the smell hit me first, like rotten eggs mixed with decay. Bones littered the ground. Human bones. "Well, this just keeps getting better," Mendoza muttered. At the back, a pile of journals and equipment suggested we weren't the first to seek refuge here. I picked up a torn notebook. Sketches of the creature filled the pages, along with notes about local legends. They called it the Shadow Fang, a guardian spirit turned malevolent due to some broken taboo. Superstitious nonsense, I thought, but couldn't shake the feeling that we'd stumbled into something way over our pay grade. The pounding outside subsided. "Think it's gone?" Mendoza whispered. "Sure, probably went home to watch some Animal Planet," I replied. A scraping sound echoed from deeper within the cave. We turned slowly to see another set of glowing eyes staring back at us. "You've got to be kidding me," Mendoza groaned. This one was smaller but no less intimidating. Looks like we found Junior, I said. Without warning, it leaped. We dodged, and it collided with the wall. Not the brightest bunch, are they? I pulled out my combat knife. As it recovered, I lunged, aiming for the neck. The blade sank in, and the creature screeched. "Help me pin it down!" I shouted. Mendoza joined me, and together we managed to subdue it. Up close, its features were more defined, a mix between a wild boar and a hyena, but twisted, as if nature had pressed the randomize button. "What do we do with it?" Mendoza asked. "Same thing we do with all bad ideas. We let them go," I said, pulling out a tranquilizer dart from a leftover pack. "Sleep tight, ugly!" I jabbed it into the creature's hide. It struggled for a moment before collapsing. "One down, one to go," Mendoza sighed. "We needed a plan. If light hurt the big one before, maybe we can use that," I suggested. We rigged together makeshift explosives using flares and C4 from our packs. Always knew those chemistry classes would pay off, I grinned. "Yeah, Mrs. Thompson would be proud," Mendoza chuckled. Exiting the cave cautiously, we set up the traps around the entrance. The jungle was unnervingly silent. "Come on, you overgrown science project," I muttered. As if on cue, the ground trembled. The creature burst through the foliage, eyes locked onto us. "Now!" We detonated the first charge. A blinding flash lit up the area. The creature roared in pain but kept coming. "Plan B?" Mendoza looked at me. "Run!" I shouted. We sprinted toward a cliffside we'd noticed earlier. The drop was steep, but a river snaked below. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" I asked. "That we should have become accountants?" Mendoza replied. "Exactly." With the creature closing in, we took a leap of faith. The fall felt like an eternity before we hit the icy water. The current was strong, pulling us downstream. Gasping for air, we managed to reach the bank a few hundred yards away. Crawling onto solid ground, we looked back to see the creature pacing along the cliff edge. It let out a frustrated roar before disappearing back into the jungle. "Guess he doesn't like swimming," Mendoza coughed. We made our way back to the village, battered but alive. The locals stared in disbelief as we emerged from the trees. The elder approached us, eyes wide. "You saw it," he stated. "Yeah, and it wasn't a Disney character," I replied. He nodded solemnly and handed me the carved totem he'd been clutching earlier. "Protection," he said. "A little late for that," I muttered, but took it anyway. We radioed for extraction. As we waited, Mendoza looked at me. "Think anyone's going to believe this?" I laughed. "Not unless we get Spielberg to direct our debriefing." The chopper arrived, and as we lifted off, I couldn't help but look back at the dense canopy. Part of me wondered if we'd just scratched the surface of what lurked in those shadows. But then again, curiosity had already gotten enough people killed. "Next time, let's pick a mission that involves beaches and pina coladas," Mendoza suggested. Agreed. I've had enough jungle adventures to last a lifetime. Back at base, the higher-ups tried to make sense of our report. "Unidentified hostile creatures. You expect us to file this?" One officer scoffed. I leaned forward. "With all due respect, sir, you sent us out there without intel. We did our job." They eventually labeled it as a classified encounter, buried under layers of red tape. Suited me just fine. Less paperwork. As for the creature or creatures we left behind, I figured they'd continue their reign over that slice of jungle. And unless someone else was dumb enough to go looking, they'd remain a local legend. A week later, I received a package. The totem from the village elder. Attached was a note, "For when the shadows grow long." I chuckled. "Looks like we've got a fan club." "What's that?" Mendoza asked. "Just a souvenir," I replied, tucking it into my locker. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Besides, I've always preferred a good punchline to a long story. So why did the Green Beret cross the jungle? To get the heck out of there before the locals made him their next bedtime story. In 2012, I found myself deep in the dense jungles of the Congo, a place where the canopy is so thick that sunlight struggles to touch the forest floor. My name is Lachlan Mercer, and I've spent most of my life navigating terrains that most people only read about. The army had become my home, and the Green Berets were my family. Growing up in rural Scotland, I never imagined I'd end up halfway across the world. But life has a funny way of leading you down unexpected paths. I suppose my penchant for adventure and knack for languages made me a good fit for special operations. We were on a mission to locate and assist a group of researchers who had gone silent. They were studying rare plant species with potential medicinal properties. Communication had ceased abruptly, and satellite images showed their camp untouched but eerily quiet. My team, consisting of seasoned operatives, was tasked with figuring out what went wrong. As we made our way through the jungle, the air was thick with humidity and the scent of wet earth. Birds called out from the treetops, and the distant chatter of monkeys provided a constant backdrop. The foliage was so dense that we had to machete our way through in places. I cracked a joke about us being the world's most overqualified gardeners, and the guys chuckled. Dark humor was our way of coping with the stresses of the job. "Think we'll get hazard pay for mosquito bites?" quipped Mason, our medic. He was always quick with a one-liner, and his lightheartedness was a welcome relief. "Only if they carry off one of us," I replied. After hours of trekking, we arrived at the researchers' camp just as the sun began to set. Tents stood undisturbed. Equipment was neatly arranged, but there wasn't a soul in sight. It was as if they'd simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. "Stay sharp," I instructed. "Something doesn't feel right." We split into pairs to search the area. I partnered with Ramirez, a quiet but reliable guy from New Mexico. As we moved between the tents, a sense of unease settled over me. There were no signs of struggle, no overturned chairs, no scattered belongings. It was the lack of chaos that was unsettling. "Found their logs," Ramirez said, holding up a notebook. "Last entry was 3 days ago. Mentioned something about unusual animal tracks nearby." "Let me see that." The entry described large circular tracks unlike anything they'd seen before. The researchers had planned to set up motion-activated cameras to capture images of the creature. "Maybe they found Bigfoot," I joked half-heartedly. "Out here, more likely a gorilla with a weight problem," Ramirez smirked. We regrouped at the center of the camp. Mason had discovered a pot of stew, mold just beginning to form on the surface. "Whatever happened, it happened fast," he noted. As night fell, we decided to stay at the camp. Setting up our own gear seemed redundant, and the researchers' tents offered adequate shelter. We established a watch rotation, 2 hours each. I took the first shift alongside Thompson, our communications specialist. The jungle transformed at night. The symphony of animals grew louder, and the darkness seemed almost tangible. Thompson tried to raise command on the sat phone, but got nothing but static. "Must be the canopy interfering," he muttered. Hours passed uneventfully until it was time to wake Mason and Ramirez for their shift. I crawled into a sleeping bag, exhaustion pulling me under almost immediately. A scream tore through the night, jolting me awake. I scrambled out of the tent, weapon in hand. Mason was already up, scanning the perimeter with his rifle's flashlight. "Where's Ramirez?" I shouted. "He went to check a noise," Mason replied, his voice tight. We formed a defensive circle, backs to each other. The beams from our flashlights pierced the darkness, but the jungle seemed to swallow the light. "Ramirez, report," I called out. Silence. Thompson began to edge toward the direction Ramirez had gone. "We can't just leave him out there." "Stay in formation," I ordered. We moved together. We advanced slowly, every rustle and snap putting us on edge. The underbrush was thick, making visibility poor. Suddenly, Mason pointed ahead. "There!" We saw Ramirez's rifle on the ground, but no sign of him. "Fan out, but stay within sight," I instructed. As we searched, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow moving swiftly between the trees. "Contact left," I shouted. We spun to face the threat, but there was nothing there. "This isn't funny," Thompson yelled into the void. A low, rumbling sound echoed around us, like the purr of a giant cat, but deeper, more resonant. "Is that a leopard?" Mason whispered. "Too guttural for a leopard," I replied, regretting the unease in my voice. Without warning, Thompson was yanked backward, disappearing into the foliage. His scream was cut short. Mason and I rushed to where he had stood moments before, finding only disturbed leaves and broken branches. "Thompson!" Mason called out. "Keep it together," I said, gripping his shoulder. "We need to regroup and figure out what we're dealing with." We retreated to the camp, the sense of being hunted pressing down on us. Back at the tents, I grabbed the researcher's notes, flipping through pages frantically. Sketches of the tracks, notes on movement patterns, and then a crude drawing caught my eye. It depicted a large creature, hunched over with elongated limbs and a maw filled with sharp teeth. "Ever seen anything like this?" I showed the drawing to Mason. He shook his head. "Closest thing would be a hyena, but they're not native here." The radio crackled to life, static filling the air, followed by a faint voice. "Mayday? Need assistance?" "Ramirez?" I grabbed the handset. "Ramirez, is that you?" "North. River. Hurry!" "He's alive. Let's go," Mason urged. Against my better judgment, we headed north toward the river, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. The jungle seemed to close in around us, every shadow a potential threat. We reached the riverbank, the water glistening under the moonlight. There was no sign of Ramirez. "Split up and search," I said, "but stay within shouting distance." As we combed the area, a chilling realization settled over me. There were footprints in the mud, massive circular prints with elongated toe marks, unlike any animal I'd ever known. Before I could call out to Mason, a blood-curdling scream echoed from downstream. I sprinted toward the sound, branches whipping against my face. I found Mason kneeling beside Ramirez's body, or what was left of it. His torso was shredded, deep gashes revealing bone and viscera. Mason's face was ashen. What could do this? A rustling behind us made us spin around. Standing there was the creature, a towering figure standing on two legs like a man but covered in matted fur. Its eyes reflected the moonlight, and its jaw was lined with teeth reminiscent of a crocodile's. "Run!" I shouted, firing my rifle at the beast. The bullet seemed to barely faze it, but it recoiled slightly. Mason and I took the chance to flee back toward the camp. "Head for the flares!" I yelled. We burst into the clearing, and I grabbed a flare gun from my pack, firing it into the sky. The red light illuminated the area, casting eerie shadows. "Back up, we'll see that," Mason panted. A thunderous crash signaled the creature's arrival at the edge of the camp. It let out a sound that resonated deep within my chest like the roar of a lion amplified tenfold. "Circle around," I ordered. We split, trying to flank the creature. Mason hurled a grenade, the explosion ripping through the silence. Smoke and debris filled the air. "Did we get it?" he called out. As the smoke cleared, the silhouette of the beast emerged, limping but very much alive. "This thing just won't quit," I exclaimed. Desperate, I scanned the area for anything that could give us an advantage. My eyes fell upon a stack of fuel canisters near the generators. "Mason, cover me." I sprinted toward the canisters, bullets whizzing past me as Mason engaged the creature. I doused a rag with fuel, stuffed it into the canister's opening, and lit it with a match. Fire in the hole. I hurled the makeshift bomb at the beast. The explosion was deafening, a fireball engulfing the creature. It let out a horrific screech as flames consumed it. We didn't wait to see if it was finished. "We need to get out of here," I urged. "Nah." We grabbed what we could carry and made a beeline for the extraction point several miles away. The jungle was a blur as adrenaline propelled us forward. Just as dawn broke, we reached a clearing suitable for helicopter pickup. I radioed our coordinates, praying for a quick response. "ETA 15 minutes, the pilot confirmed. Mason collapsed onto the ground, breathing heavily. What the hell was that thing? I shook my head. I don't know, but it wasn't any animal documented in these parts. As we waited, the ground beneath us began to tremble slightly. Birds took flight en masse, their calls frantic. Now what? Mason groaned. From the tree line, multiple figures emerged. 3 more creatures identical to the one we'd fought. Our earlier skirmish had drawn them. "Looks like we kicked the hornet's nest," I said grimly. We were low on ammo and options. The helicopter was still minutes away. "Got any more tricks up your sleeve?" Mason asked. I scanned the area and spotted a rocky outcrop above us. "Help me push that boulder." We scrambled up and began leveraging our weight against the massive rock. The creatures were closing in, their movements methodical and predatory. "Come on, just a little more." I gritted my teeth. With a final heave, the boulder broke loose, tumbling down and smashing into the creatures. Two were crushed, but one dodged at the last second. "One left," Mason noted, raising his rifle. The creature lunged at incredible speed, tackling Mason to the ground. I fired repeatedly, aiming for its head. Blood splattered as bullets found their mark, and the creature slumped over. I pulled Mason free. He was battered but alive. The sound of rotors filled the air as the helicopter approached. Relief washed over me. "Let's get the hell out of here," I said. We boarded the chopper, and as we lifted off, I looked down at the jungle below. The canopy swayed gently, hiding the dangers within. Back at base, we debriefed command on the events. Skepticism was evident, but the injuries and loss of our team members lent credibility to our account. Samples from the creature's remains were sent for analysis. Weeks later, reports came back inconclusive. The official statement labeled the incident as attacks by rogue guerrillas. But we knew better. Mason and I were reassigned, the files sealed. The jungle held secrets that weren't meant to be uncovered. As for the researchers, their disappearance remained a tragic mystery, one that joined a list of unsolved cases in remote parts of the world. The creatures we encountered were an anomaly, something beyond conventional understanding. Life moved on, missions came and went, but the Congo left an indelible mark. It was a stark reminder that even in the age of technology and information, there are still corners of the earth that defy explanation. I guess not everything needs a neat ending or a logical conclusion. Sometimes, you just have to accept that the world is a strange place. They say humor is the best armor against the unknown, but I never thought I'd be cracking jokes in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. It was 2010 when our team was dispatched to a remote part of Brazil, tasked with investigating a series of unexplained disappearances. Locals whispered about a lurking menace, but I figured it was just another tall tale to scare outsiders. I'm Daniel Reed, by the way. Friends call me Danny. I've been with the Green Berets for 11 years, and I've learned that a smile can get you through most things, except maybe food poisoning from an undercooked MRE. The mission sounded straightforward. Find the missing researchers and bring them home. We touched down near a small village, the kind of place where Wi-Fi is a myth and the only bar serves something that could strip paint off a Humvee. The villagers were tight-lipped, but their eyes told stories their mouths wouldn't. Something had them spooked. "Maybe they just don't like your aftershave," I joked to Sergeant Collins as we geared up. "Funny, Reed, real funny," he replied, rolling his eyes. We headed into the jungle, the canopy above swallowing most of the sunlight. The air was thick, each breath like sipping soup. Mosquitoes the size of quarters buzzed around us, and I swear one of them asked me for my blood type. After a few hours, we found the researchers' campsite, or what was left of it. Tents were shredded, equipment smashed, and personal belongings scattered like confetti at a parade. But no bodies. "Looks like a tornado hit this place," Private Martinez muttered. "Last I checked, tornadoes aren't common in rainforests," I said. "Maybe it was a jaguar," Collins suggested. "A jaguar that doesn't leave footprints?" I pointed out, gesturing at the undisturbed ground. We decided to set up camp before nightfall. As we settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Hey, did you hear the one about the soldier who went into the jungle and came out a vegetarian?" I quipped. "Save the stand-up routine for open mic night," Collins replied, but I caught the hint of a smile. The first sign of trouble came with the darkness. An eerie silence blanketed the area, the usual sounds of the jungle replaced by an oppressive quiet. Then came the stench, a foul odor like rotting meat left out in the sun. "Smells worse than Martinez's socks," I whispered. "Not funny, man," Martinez shot back, sniffing his boot defensively. A sudden scream tore through the silence. We sprang into action, weapons drawn, but found nothing except a torn piece of fabric snagged on a branch. Stay sharp, Collins ordered. Whatever's out there, it's playing games. Great. I always wanted to be on a game show, I mumbled. Around midnight, we heard rustling in the bushes. Who's there? I called out. No answer, just more rustling, circling us. Cut the theatrics, Collins barked. Without warning, something burst from the undergrowth, a massive shape that tackled Private Lewis before any of us could react. There was a blur of claws and a sickening crunch. We opened fire, but the thing moved with unnatural speed, disappearing back into the jungle. We rushed to Lewis's side, but it was too late. He was gone, eyes staring blankly at the canopy above. Deep gashes crisscrossed his body, too large and too precise for any animal we knew. What the hell was that? Martinez gasped. An audition for Worst Nightmare, apparently, I said, my attempt at levity falling flat. We need to radio for extraction, Collins decided. Signal's dead, I replied after fiddling with the equipment. Something's jamming us. Of course it is, Collins muttered, because nothing can ever be easy. We huddled together, backs against each other, weapons ready. Hours passed like days. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves set our nerves on edge. As dawn approached, the attacks resumed. This time it went for Corporal Jenkins, dragging him screaming into the foliage. His cries were cut short, replaced by that nauseating silence. Enough of this, Collins shouted. We're getting out of here now. We moved as fast as we could, but the jungle seemed to conspire against us. Vines snagged our gear and the ground turned to mud beneath our boots. Anyone else feel like the guest of honor at a dinner party? I asked. Keep your eyes forward, Collins snapped. The creature struck again, a blur of muscle and fangs. It barreled into Martinez, sending him crashing into a tree. I fired at it, the bullet seeming to barely faze the beast. It was like a wolf crossed with a Komodo dragon, massive and terrifyingly agile. Reed, move, Collins yelled. We stumbled upon a river and followed it, hoping it would lead us to safety. The creature didn't relent. It shadowed us, occasionally darting forward to swipe at us before retreating. Got any more jokes, funny man? Collins panted. Why did the monster cross the road? I wheezed. To get to the other... Not the time. The river led us to a waterfall cascading over jagged rocks. Dead end, I said. Not yet, Collins replied, eyes scanning the area. We make our stand here. We set up what little explosives we had left, rigging them to detonate when the creature got close. Hope this works, I said. Otherwise, we're the special of the day. Just be ready, Collins instructed. The creature emerged from the trees, stalking toward us with a predatory confidence. It bared its teeth, a grotesque array of fangs that would make a dentist retire. Come on, you ugly son of a gun, I taunted. It charged. We waited until it was within range before triggering the explosives. The blast was deafening, sending debris flying. When the dust settled, the creature lay motionless. Is it dead? Martinez coughed, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. Only one way to find out, I said, approaching cautiously. As I neared it, the creature's eyes snapped open. It lunged, but Collins shoved me out of the way, taking the hit himself. They both tumbled over the edge of the waterfall, disappearing into the churning waters below. Collins! I screamed, rushing to the edge. There was no sign of either of them. Martinez and I made our way down the rocky path beside the falls, desperate to find Collins. We searched the riverbank but found nothing except Collins's dog tags caught on a branch. He's gone, Martinez whispered. We were the only ones left, exhausted, injured, but alive. We trekked until we stumbled upon a logging road and eventually flagged down a truck. Back at base, our superiors listened to our report with skeptical expressions. Unidentified creature? Disappearances? The colonel questioned. Sounds like you boys had a rough camping trip. It's the truth, I insisted. Officially, your mission was a success, he replied curtly. The missing researchers are presumed dead due to natural causes. You're to keep this to yourselves. Understood? Crystal clear, I said bitterly. As we left the office, Martinez shook his head. Natural causes. Right. Well, if that's natural, I don't want to see what's unnatural, I replied. Think anyone will believe us? Doubtful. But hey, at least we have a great story for the next campfire. Martinez managed a weak laugh. You're something else, Reed. Yeah, a real comedian, I said, twirling Colin's dog tags in my fingers. Maybe I'll take up stand-up if this soldiering thing doesn't work out. Just leave me out of your punchlines. Can't make any promises. We parted ways, and I headed to the mess hall, stomach rumbling. As I grabbed a tray, the cook smirked. Heard you had quite the adventure. You could say that, I replied. Well, today's special is mystery meat. Care to guess what it is? I stared at the unappetizing blob on my plate. After what I've been through, I'd rather not. He chuckled. Suit yourself. I sat alone, poking at the food. Maybe the Colonel was right. Maybe some things were better left off the record. But deep down, I knew what we'd faced was real. As I left the hall, I overheard two privates talking about strange sightings near the perimeter. I sighed. Here we go again, I muttered. Guess the jungle isn't the only place with wild beasts. At least this time I know to pack extra grenades and maybe a joke book. Because if laughter is the best medicine, I'm going to need a whole pharmacy. The wind had a way of whispering secrets in the Alaskan wilderness that few ever heard. In the stillness of the Arctic twilight, I could almost pretend I was alone in the world, miles away from the noise and haste that usually cluttered my life. It was 2015, and the remote expanses near the Bering Strait were as close to solitude as one could get. My name is Darius Cole. Friends say I've got a dry wit that sneaks up on you, much like the cold out here. Growing up in a small town in Montana, I'd always found comfort in open spaces and rugged terrains. Joining the Green Berets seemed like a natural extension of that love, except with a bit more adventure and a lot more responsibility. We were on a mission to gather intelligence about unusual activity reported by isolated fishing communities along the coast. Locals had mentioned missing persons and strange sightings that couldn't be chalked up to mere tall tales. Our team of 5 was tasked with investigating these anomalies discreetly. Looks like we've traded sand for snow, joked Ramirez, a fellow operative known for his knack for lightening the mood. At least you can't get a sunburn here. Yeah, but frostbite's a real knee-slapper, I shot back, smirking. As we trudged through the snow-laden forest, the trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches weighed down by layers of ice. The daylight was fleeting, and the long shadows seemed to play tricks on the eyes. Still, years of training had sharpened our senses to a fine edge. We reached an abandoned outpost that was supposed to serve as our observation point. The place had seen better days, walls riddled with cracks, a roof that sagged under the weight of accumulated snow, and windows clouded with frost. Inside, we found signs that someone had been there recently. A smoldering fire, discarded food cans, and a torn piece of cloth snagged on a broken chair. Strange. Our intel didn't mention any squatters, Thompson noted, his brow furrowed. Maybe they left in a hurry, suggested Nguyen, the most analytical among us. As night fell, the temperature plummeted. We set up our equipment, taking turns on watch. The radio was mostly silent, save for occasional bursts of static that seemed oddly rhythmic. It was during Ramirez's shift that things took a turn. Guys, you need to see this, he whispered urgently. We gathered around the small window. At first I saw nothing but darkness punctuated by the faint outline of trees. Then movement, swift and deliberate, just at the edge of our perimeter. Could be wildlife, Thompson said, though his tone lacked conviction. Big wildlife, I added, noting the considerable size of the silhouette. Deciding to investigate, we geared up and stepped outside, our breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The snow crunched softly underfoot as we fanned out, eyes scanning for any sign of movement. Over here, Nguyen called out softly. We converged on his position to find a set of tracks unlike any we'd seen before. They were large, oval-shaped, and embedded deep into the snow, suggesting significant weight. Claw marks trailed at the front, and the stride was long, too long for any known predator in these parts. Well, unless polar bears started walking on hind legs, we've got a problem, Ramirez quipped, though his eyes betrayed unease. We followed the tracks cautiously. They led us deeper into the forest, where the trees grew denser and the light from the moon struggled to penetrate. The radio crackled again, this time emitting a low-frequency hum that set my teeth on edge. Suddenly a scream pierced the silence, a human scream coming from somewhere ahead. Without hesitation, we broke into a run, adrenaline overriding the cold, biting at our faces. We burst into a clearing to find remnants of a campsite, a torn tent, supplies strewn about, and blood staining the pristine snow. No bodies, just chaos. "Stay sharp," I cautioned, my grip tightening on my rifle. A rustling noise came from the left. Thompson swung his flashlight around, and for a fleeting second we saw it, a massive creature that defied easy description. It stood upright like a man, but was covered in thick, matted fur. Its face bore a resemblance to a wolverine, elongated snout and all, but much larger and more menacing. "What in the world?" Nguyen muttered. The creature let out a sound, a chilling mix between a howl and a snarl that sent a shiver down my spine. Before anyone could react, it lunged at Thompson with terrifying speed. The impact knocked him off his feet, and they both disappeared into the darkness beyond our light. "Thompson!" I shouted, rushing forward. We found him a few yards away, unconscious but breathing, with deep gashes across his torso. The creature was nowhere in sight. "He's losing a lot of blood," Ramirez said, already pressing a bandage against the wounds. "We need to get him back to the outpost," I ordered. As we lifted Thompson onto a makeshift stretcher, the forest around us came alive with unsettling sounds. Branches snapping, snow crunching, as if we were being circled. "Move now," I barked. We retraced our steps as quickly as possible, the weight of Thompson and our gear making it a grueling trek. The noises followed us, sometimes closing in, other times fading, but never disappearing entirely. Back at the outpost, we secured the doors and windows. Nguyen administered first aid to Thompson, while Ramirez and I kept watch. "What was that thing?" Ramirez asked, his usual humor absent. "I don't know, but it's hunting us," I replied. The radio sprang to life again, this time emitting a garbled transmission. Amidst the static, a few words were discernible. "Evacuate. Dangerous. Unknown species." "Well, that's helpful," Ramirez said dryly. Thompson regained consciousness but was delirious, mumbling incoherently about eyes in the darkness and teeth like daggers. Hours passed with no further incidents. Just when we thought we might have a moment to regroup, the outpost shook violently. Something was ramming against the wall. "Brace the door!" I yelled. We pushed heavy furniture against the entrance. The creature, or perhaps there were more than one, was relentless, pounding with such force that cracks began to appear in the wooden beams. "Roof access," Nguyen suggested. It was risky, but staying put wasn't an option. We helped Thompson up the ladder to the roof hatch. Just as Ramirez was about to climb up, the door burst open, splintering into pieces. The creature stood there, illuminated by the dim interior light. Its eyes reflected a cold intelligence, and saliva dripped from a maw filled with sharp teeth reminiscent of a crocodile's. "Go!" I shouted to Ramirez. He scrambled up the ladder as I fired several rounds at the creature. The bullets struck its torso, causing it to stagger but not fall. It let out another terrifying sound and advanced. I retreated up the ladder, pulling it up just as the creature reached the base. On the roof, the icy wind was unforgiving. We had limited options, and time was running out. "There's a radio tower nearby," Nguyen said. "If we can reach it, we might send a distress signal." "Thompson can't go much further," Ramirez pointed out. "We don't have a choice," I replied. We devised a plan to use a rope to lower ourselves down the opposite side of the building, hoping to put some distance between us and the creature. One by one we descended, the rope biting into our gloved hands. As we made our escape, the creature emerged from the outpost, having climbed up through the same hatch we'd used. It moved with an uncanny agility, bounding across the roof. "Split up," I ordered. "It can't follow all of us." Nguyen and Ramirez headed toward the dense part of the forest with Thompson between them, while I led the creature away, firing sporadically to keep its attention. It pursued me relentlessly. I navigated through the trees, using the terrain to my advantage. The creature was fast but large, making it less nimble among the tight clusters of trunks and branches. I spotted a narrow crevice between two rocks, a tight squeeze for me, but likely impassable for something of its size. Ducking into the gap, I held my breath as the creature approached. It reached into the crevice with a clawed hand, narrowly missing my face. Thinking quickly, I pulled out a flare from my pack and ignited it, thrusting it toward the creature's arm. It recoiled, letting out a piercing sound that echoed through the forest. Seizing the moment, I scrambled out the other side of the rocks and made a beeline toward the radio tower's location. As I broke through the tree line, the tower loomed ahead, an industrial skeleton against the backdrop of the night sky. I could see Ramirez at the base, frantically adjusting the controls of a portable transmitter. Nguyen's inside trying to boost the signal, he informed me. Thompson? He's stable for now. A loud crash sounded behind me. The creature had resumed its pursuit, undeterred by the flare. It's coming, I warned. Ramirez and I took positions, readying our weapons. This time, we aimed for the head. As the creature closed in, we fired in unison. The shots hit their mark, causing it to stagger but not stop. Why won't it go down? Ramirez exclaimed. Just then, Nguyen's voice crackled over our earpieces. I've got a signal. Evac team en route. ETA 10 minutes. Let's hope we last that long, I muttered. The creature lunged forward. Ramirez threw a flashbang grenade, and the ensuing explosion of light and sound momentarily disoriented it. But its resilience was astounding. It shook off the effects faster than any adversary we'd encountered. With limited ammunition and time running out, I decided on a desperate measure. Spotting a fuel barrel near a maintenance shed, I signaled to Ramirez. Help me roll that toward it. Understanding dawned on his face. Together, we pushed the heavy barrel into the creature's path. As it closed in, I fired at the barrel. The bullet pierced the metal, igniting the fuel inside. A fiery explosion engulfed the creature. The force knocked us off our feet. For a moment, silence reigned except for the crackling of flames. Then, from within the inferno, we saw movement. The creature stumbled out, its fur ablaze, but this time it collapsed, succumbing to its injuries. That better have done it, Ramirez said, breathing heavily. The sound of helicopter blades sliced through the air. Our evacuation had arrived. Medics tended to Thompson as we boarded the chopper. As we lifted off, I looked down at the burning remains of the creature. Questions swirled in my mind about what it was and where it came from, but those were mysteries for another day. Back at the base, debriefings were intense. Samples were collected from the site, and higher-ups were keen on keeping the incident under wraps. Weeks later, reports surfaced of similar sightings in other remote regions. It seemed we had stumbled upon a new apex predator, something that didn't fit into any known classification, a grim reminder that the world still held secrets beyond our understanding. I sat in the mess hall with Ramirez and Nguyen. You know, Ramirez began, if anyone asks, let's just say it was a big ugly moose with anger issues. We chuckled. Works for me, I agreed. Thompson was on the mend, already making plans to get back into the field. As for me, I had a newfound appreciation for the unpredictable nature of our work. Sometimes the wilderness bites back harder than expected. But that's just another day on the job.